Welcome to Smashed Avo Property. Today I'm speaking with Jyh Kao. He's a young bloke in his 30s that's already managed to build a 5-property portfolio. Jyh is kind enough to walk us through what he purchased, when he purchased it, and how much for. I found his story super inspirational, and it's a perfect example of getting the portfolio mix right to keep purchasing.
As soon as I finished uni, I started working full-time in a corporate marketing job, and I'm still working in that role at the moment. So I've always had jobs and sometimes multiple jobs. Like at the moment I work full-time and I also co-own a gym as well. So for me, it was looking to create multiple sources of income and trying to reduce my expenditure.
As always, seek your own professional financial, legal, taxation, and property investing advice for your current situation. Everything we talk about is just our opinion and general in nature and should never be considered as personal advice. Jyh Kao, welcome to Smashed Avo Property.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks for having me on. Very excited to be here.
Mate, I'm super wrapped. I saw you popping up in my feed one day and I thought you would be a great person to get onto the podcast. So first and foremost, why don't you give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Jyh. I'm based in Sydney. I'm 31 years old this year. I'm a marketing manager. I work for an Australian telco. I've been there for almost 10 years and I grew up in Sydney. And for me, I love property because it's one of the things I've been able to see grow over the last couple of decades in terms of investments. My parents didn't come to Australia with much wealth. They actually came here as first generation migrants to Sydney. And I've seen them work extremely hard throughout the last couple of decades. And they weren't wealthy. They weren't property investors at all to start with. They actually became a property investor kind of by chance through a friend who was actually a mortgage broker. And what happened at the time was, we got to, when I got around year 6 and we're looking to move to high school. And my parents wanted me to get into a decent public high school, and that was being in Kalara High. And we lived in the Northern Beaches. So my parents thought, okay, we got to sell our house and move over there. But then after talking to a mortgage broker, they realized the potential of actually leveraging debt to buy another house and using their current property as an investment property. So they basically opened the door up for them and said, look, why don't you rent out your current place and we can look at how much you can borrow, because both my parents were working full time. They had good savings history and decent amount of income for both of them. So they said, look, why don't we rent out the current place and then buy another place in Linfield. So we bought the cheapest house that we could find in Linfield because that's all they could afford at the time. And I think they bought it for around $400,000 for a 3-bedroom home. And after 16 years of living there, we sold the place. My parents wanted to move back to the Northern Beaches. That's where my dad works. So we sold the Linfield home for about 1.6 mil. So that's more than 3 times the amount that they bought it for. So from then on, I realized the potential of property investing. I was like, holy crap, you can make so much money. And it's not just money, right? It's just it's the power of investing. If you had bought a property that could increase 2-fold, 3-fold over that sort of time. And if you scale that at a larger level, then that's a very successful way of building wealth. So I thought to myself, that's something that I really want to do. And I was only when we sold the Linfield home, I think I was around mid-20s, 25. And that's when I first bought my first investment property in North Sydney. And then that's how I realized, essentially how I got into property investing is basically through that story.
That is a phenomenal story, and it's so critical to have that first-hand experience, or just not critical, but it's important, essential to have that sort of first-hand experience to realize this is what property can do. I think, that's been one of the biggest impactors in my life too, is just being able to see it first and foremost, see how it works, see how the portfolio grows and all that sort of stuff. And it's awesome that your parents have been able to have such a good success story. Whereabouts were they from?
So my parents' background is from Taiwan.
Nice. That's crazy. It must have been an amazing story to come to Australia and see that sort of growth in a property and be able to, hold on to 2 properties through a mortgage strategy. That's phenomenal. That's so cool.
Inspired by them because they came to Australia couldn't even speak English, and it was so tough for them. So for them to actually see them, grow their wealth so far was actually so inspiring for me. And I was like, okay, I would like to do something similar and try and replicate what they've done through property.
That's crazy. It's just kicked off your journey like nothing else. And so when you realized that property can do what it does and you've seen it firsthand, what was your next move? Did you like start to delve into online blogs or books or podcasts? What got you excited? Like what triggered off that next sort of phase?
Yeah, it's a good question. When I first started, I guess social media wasn't really big at that time. I think Instagram was like barely being used that frequently. It was mainly just Facebook, and no one was really doing podcasts. There weren't many books that I knew of. So a lot of my knowledge was just either through my parents or through friends. And I didn't honestly have many friends that were investing at the time either. So when I first bought my first property, I actually didn't really know what I was doing. I just thought, okay, I'm just going to go buy an apartment in my first property was in North Sydney. So I thought that was a good, kind of blue chip area to buy in, being close to the CBD. It was, I think for me, what triggered it was just talking to people that I knew that were investing. But then when social media became bigger, that was when I realized, wow, there's so much information out there. There's like a wealth of information and knowledge on YouTube, on podcasts right now, like the one that you're doing yourself at the moment, which is amazing because young people can just learn so much from this after speaking to people who've actually been through the process. So at the time, to be honest, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just trying to get information from who were currently investing. So the knowledge that I had was very limited.
Yeah, 100%. Well, it's good that you were able to see it firsthand, and then as you've grown and done your research and gotten into a social media guru and start to see in the horizons, you can learn along the way. And I think that's, it's so cool that there's so much information online at the moment, but it's also, it's like, where do you get your source of information from? I think, that's super important as well. There's just abundance of information online and it's all well and good and relevant. But just take it all for a grain of salt and kind of, stick to your 2 or 3 mentors. This is what works for me is sticking to 2 or 3 mentors, understanding what everyone's trying to say and try and find the commonalities between them and learn from other people's success stories. But it is so good that there's so much information online at the moment. Now, it sounds.
I love what you're doing. It's so good. You basically just bring together, all the great sources into one location.
Oh, thanks, mate. I appreciate it. So it sounds like money kind of was talked a little bit in the household, but was it a common theme? Like, would you talk around the dinner table about finances and all that sort of stuff with your parents when you were younger?
Yeah, we were. I always grew up with the mentality that we had to save. Like saving was the way to wealth, to be honest. That was my parents always told me, and seeing how hard they saved, like every single dollar was going to the home loan, paying down the debt. And I just thought, wow, this is a hard life. Like they just paid down the debt as fast as they could, and they didn't really have the mindset of investing. It was only because of the mortgage breakup. But after their second property, they didn't continue investing because they still didn't believe that they were property investors. They kind of just thought they got lucky because the market had moved up. But that's when I started to go, into this topic a little bit further. Because I thought, there must be like really successful people all tend to have, either 2 things. They've got, money in property, in shares, or in business. So that was a commonality across, very wealthy people. So I thought there has to be a better way of growing wealth through investing. So that's when I started to, read books like, Robert Kiyosaki. I came across, a couple of mentors who were mortgage brokers as well. That's where I really found the power of investing and compound interest through being able to leverage debt and borrow against debt and structure it correctly in assets that actually grow in capital growth.
That's a big light bulb, isn't it? When that light bulb ticks on, it's just like your mind gets blown about. You're not gonna. There's no quick wins. You're not going to see, double your money overnight. But if you patiently wait, if you apply delayed gratification, if you're in it for the long haul, the 20, 30, 40-year play, and you watch that compound effect over time, that's where the big wins are. So in saying that, did you have like a little savings goal? Did you have a certain strategy that you do, like put 10% away every week, and how did that play out to building up your deposit?
Yeah, look, honestly, I've tried everything. I think I've experienced, being a good saver, being a bad saver. I've experienced everything. Like I've had bad debt before, so I think it's through this experience that allowed me to work out what works and how to save for my first deposit. Because I guess that was probably the hardest part, is to get that initial 20% deposit. Because I knew from a young age that I had to save in order to get into property. And I worked since I was 15 years old. So I've always been working, whether like it was a retail job, but I've been working many retail jobs whilst I was studying at uni. And as soon as I finished uni, I started working full time in a corporate marketing job, and I'm still working in that role at the moment. So I've always had jobs and sometimes multiple jobs. Like at the moment, I work full time and also co-own a gym as well. So for me, it was looking to create multiple sources of income and trying to reduce my expenditure. So I lived at home up until I was 27 years old. So I guess up until then, I was, I had a lot less expenses in terms of living expenses. I didn't have to pay rent. I didn't really have to pay for groceries, and it was more just my current expenditure was more just around my lifestyle costs. So I guess, that helped me a lot. It was more around just, looking to stay at home for as long as I can, trying to reduce any expense that I didn't really need. But I've had car loans before. I've had credit card debts. I've had, those, when you go to like Harvey Norman or JB Hi-Fi, you get lured by those interest-free repayment options. I've done all that before. So it's through these experiences that I know, okay, it's good to save money, because when you get into debt like this, you just end up in more and more debt, and you're never really paying off the debt because you just keep paying the interest on the debt. So I've been in both situations, so I know what it is like to be in debt, and what it does feel like to be not in debt in terms of like non-productive debt. So that's pretty much my take on saving into my first deposit.
100%. It's, you almost have to go through the pain to realize, when you're in a bit of a pickle, in a bit of an odd situation, and then, you can work your way out. It's as long as you don't get too far deep into trouble. I mean, you can always work your way out, but you almost have to get into that sort of position to realize, okay, well, I can pay this all off, and then I'm not having to pay interest, and then I can, start putting money away, and I start earning interest, and then then you transfer from bad debt to good debt, and then you start having to pay interest again, but you're paying interest on assets that are going to grow in value. So it's a super interesting there's so many different stages of the saving that goes through. I'm glad you touched on that. So you talked about your first property there. Why don't you give us a little bit of background on that? How old were you when you bought it? What sort of deposit do you have? And you said you bought an apartment in Sydney North, but how's that performed since?
Yeah, so my first property was a one-bedroom apartment in North Sydney. I purchased that in 2013. I was 24 years old at the time, still living at home. I bought it for $428,000. It's a one-bedroom apartment in a pretty big block of units. I think in that apartment block there's about over 100 units. I'm on ground floor, so it doesn't need access to the lift. So at the time, strata wasn't too high. It was around $700-800. It's done considerably well over the last couple of years, because when I bought it in 2013, that was when Sydney market was starting to take off, and it was experiencing quite a good growth from 2013 to around 2016. And that's what triggered my leverage into buying my third property as well. So during that time, did pretty well in terms of capital growth. I'm very passionate about renovating properties. So it was a fairly cosmetically tired apartment, I would say. Like, it's not modern. It's in a pretty old block of apartments. I think it's built in the 1970s, so it's definitely not modern. So after I bought it, I think I rented it out initially as is, and then after around 2 years, I discovered Jyh Kao, who's a renovating queen in Australia, and I went to one of her courses and learned so much about renovating, and I decided to apply what I learned onto the North Sydney apartment. So just by doing cosmetic renovations. And I spent just under $10,000 in renovations. And all it was just cosmetic, just to make the place look a lot more fresher, cleaner, a lot more modern, have better tenant appeal. And I was able to increase my rent from $450 to $515 straight after the renovation. So it was a massive increase in rental yield. And then I then got the property revalued, and after that, I can't remember the equity increase, but it was a significant amount, which allowed me to tap into that equity to buy my second property.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's funny how much a paint job and maybe some new floor coverings and just a minor things, not over capitalizing on doing a renovation, but just the little things, how much of an impact they can have, and to increase the cash flow by that much, and then also add some capital growth, add some equity to the property. That's phenomenal. So the second
exactly.
one, did you save as well for that, or did you mostly use the equity? And then when about did you buy that, and what did you buy?
Yeah, so the second property that I bought was a house in Brisbane, so a suburb called Wynnum. So it's up north, not too far from the airport. The reason why I picked Queensland at the time was because the Sydney market had grown so much that I couldn't actually buy in Sydney anymore. Like, I was priced out and my borrowing capacity just couldn't support it. So I thought, okay, let's be a little bit more creative. So I spoke to a buyer's agent, and they kind of opened up the doors to me and said, okay, why don't you consider investing interstate? And at the time I was speaking to my parents about it, and they were very gangster because they didn't really believe in buying interstate. They're like, oh, you should buy a house where you can actually see the property and you can actually go to it and tend to it yourself. But I was trying to be open. I was trying to think like an investor. At the end of the day, as long as the financials stack up, it can work. So that's why I opened my opportunities up into Queensland, and Queensland had good propositions in terms of, being affordable, getting big lands, getting a house, not too far from the CBD. So that's when I first engaged a buyer's agent to buy my second property in Brisbane. And that property I bought in 2016, so about 3 years after my first one. And I was blown that I was blown that I didn't have to use a deposit at all, because I had enough equity in my North Sydney apartment to pay for the deposit on the second property. So I was actually mind blown when I spoke to my mortgage broker. I was like, wow, I don't have to use cash for this property. They're like, yeah, you just take out equity on your first property, and then we can use that as a deposit for your next purchase. So it was from then on that it actually triggered me to think, okay, well, I can scale property investing much faster and much larger as well if I continue doing this.
Yeah, 100%. That's another big light bulb as well. Once you realize you can use equity to your own advantage and leverage into another one, that's phenomenal. What made you go to a buyer's agent? Was there something that triggered you to do that, or was there you looking like, how do I buy a property in a different state? What made you go to a buyer's agent?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I was just very open, to be honest. I went to a couple of property seminars in Sydney. So I think every year they hold like a property investment seminar, and there's lots of guest speakers there, and often you hear lots of speakers talk about multi-property portfolios and multi-million-dollar portfolios. And at that time, I was wowed. I was like, wow, how do these people, they're in the early 30s, they own multiple properties and have a multi-million-dollar portfolio. Like, I was just very curious how they did it. So it was from there where I started speaking to a lot of people, and the buyer's agent term kind of got thrown around because I guess being a very inexperienced investor at the time, I didn't really know where to look in terms of where to invest, like what suburbs have growth. Like, that was completely new to me, and a lot of the terminology I was just confused and a bit daunting at the time. So I thought, why don't I speak to a professional who does this as a full-time job, and I'm sure they'll be able to give me some advice. So I'm sure I'll learn something. And that's when I thought I'm willing to invest the money into my future. Essentially, it's like my future knowledge, but not just the property itself, but learning the process and learning how they work with other people. So I was willing to pay for a buyer's agent to look at a property for my second one, and I did get personally very involved. I guess it's up to you how involved you want to be, but I was very involved in the process. I also went to inspect the properties as well that they recommended as well. So yeah, that's how I started engaging a buyer's agent.
It's pretty daunting at the start, like to think, I'm going to buy in a different state. And that's, you know, you kind of do have the same mindset as your parents do. You know, you want to be able to touch it and feel it and, you know, go and visit it and all that sort of thing. But once you really break it down, you're essentially buying a spreadsheet. You're buying numbers on the spreadsheet, you know what I mean? And it's all about how it's performed and what's the rental return and, you know, all of those fundamental things that we always bang on about. But it's a big it's a big bullet to bite, and to chew on for a little while. But I think, you know, once I mean, it took me a while to do it, but I did on my last one. And once you do it, you're kind of happy with the result, right?
Yeah, that's right. Because when you can't see the property, you just become a bit afraid because you just don't know if your tenants are looking after it well, or, you know, you just don't know what's happening. So I think you just have to try and break over that fear and have a good team. So I think having a good team is extremely important. I've got an amazing property manager based in Brisbane who looks after my properties very well. So I guess that helps me sleep at night.
Yeah, 100%. It all comes down to team. Like the fundamentals in a team is so important. And you alluded to a third property there.
Sorry, what was that?
You alluded to a third property? Yes,
that's right. So 3 years later, I kind of took a bit of a break from property investing to allow some equity growth in the second one. So I wanted to continue investing. So I thought, okay, how do I get back onto the property market? So at that time, I engaged another buyer's agent. Actually, I wanted to work with a different buyer's agent to see what their thoughts are. I'm always open to talking to different people in the industry. So at the time, I wanted to get back in the city market because I thought Sydney is going to be the leading capital city. So I thought most of the capital growth will come from Sydney. So the third property that I looked at was a 2-bedroom apartment in Brighton, Les Sands, which is not too far from the Sydney airport actually, and it's near the Brighton Les Sands beach, so it's not too far from the water, and also very close to the lifestyle hub. Lots of restaurants, cafes, and shops there as well. So a lot of small retail shops. I thought that area was a good place to invest in, and I bought that towards the end of 2019.
Nice. It's a good little spot there. It's funny you say that because I was actually working with one of my buyer's agents, and we were going to buy in Brighton Les Sands, funnily enough, but we ended up finding something around the corner. Yeah. Well, we ended up finding something around the corner in Botany. So, but we were primarily looking there. So, it's a good spot. I like it. Well done, mate. And how did the figures stack up on that one? Were you able to use some equity again, or were you using savings?
Yeah, so for that one, I used a combination of equity and savings. Brighton Les Sands was actually the first property that I purchased that was negatively geared, because I had good cash flow from the first 2 properties. So I thought, okay, I don't mind gearing negatively a little bit to go for a little bit more growth. And I also wanted to diversify my portfolio a little bit. So I've got a 1-bedroom apartment in North Sydney. The second place is a 4-bedroom house. And the third one, I wanted to get a 2-bedroom apartment just to diversify the portfolio a little bit.
Nice. And is it in a big block as well, the Brighton Les Sands one, or is it in a block?
No, so the Brighton Les Sands, so after all the knowledge and experience that I've learned, so I wanted to buy something that has a little bit more of an owner-occupier appeal. So the one in Brighton Les Sands is a very small block, very tightly held. I think there's only about 14 units in there. And only 2 stories. There's no lift in there as well. Strata is quite low, around $500-600 a quarter, and very well maintained. So I could just tell from the facade that like the owners that live in there look after the property well. Whereas, say for example, the one in North Sydney, it's like 80% tenants. So you can tell that it hasn't been managed very well in terms of the strata. So through all that learning, I was able to look, okay, if I am buying apartments, what sort of apartments am I looking for?
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm so glad you brought that up because there's a big distinction between the two, your first and your third purchase. And I think a lot of, first-time listeners or first-time buyers that are listening to this, it's easy to see that sort of apartment and think, oh, it's cheap and it'll get me into the ladder. But you're essentially buying one little part of 100 units. So, we always talk about land being the most important thing, that the land value is what increases and buildings depreciate. So if you're buying one unit in 100, well, you're only owning, 1% of the land. So if you can get into the same sort of price point in a block that's only got 10 to 15 or something like that, or less, for a little bit more money, well, you're getting a much bigger portion of that land. And as you alluded to there, you're not paying for lifts, you're not paying big strata fees and all the other benefits that come along with it. So I think that's super important.
Yeah. And the thing to note about that upside is that when you buy something like that, you also tend to have better rental appeal as well. Like, tenants actually want to live in a place like that is well maintained, as opposed to a very big block of apartments that is kind of the same as every other apartment.
100%, and as you probably experience in a time like Corona, I mean, it's a 1 in 100 year thing, so it's not like it's going to happen consistently. But if every block in that block of 100 went up for rent at the same time, you'd be competing with everyone else to get a tenant. So it can cause some issues down the line if everyone's in the same position and struggling to rent it out or something like that.
Well, interesting you brought that up, because my first North Sydney apartment that I bought was actually the one that got impacted the most during COVID.
Yeah, wow.
I was vacant for about 8 weeks.
Wow.
Because I imagine people just don't want to be isolating in a very small space.
100%. That's truth in point. Did you cop it on the chin with a rental decrease or something?
Yeah, I had to drop the rent significantly. I think it went down from $515 to around $400. So a massive drop in rent. I know the market will eventually go back up, but I had to take a big hit on that one.
Yeah, that's full on. And there's plenty of people that are out there in the same scenario. So don't feel too bad. But I think that's a good learning experience. I think for people that are listening and trying to toss up between the two, that these are some things that you have to think about. It might be 50K cheaper, 100K cheaper, but you might have these consequences down the line.
Mm-hmm.
So for you looking forward now, I mean, you've got a decent portfolio. What's the goal? Have you got a number of properties that you want to get? Have you got a value that you want to get to? What does it look like for you in terms of what your investing goals are?
Yeah, it's a good question you ask. I haven't specifically put a number to it. I think the sky is, limitless, right? Like, I want to try and build a portfolio as big as I can that's self-sustaining. And I guess the ultimate end goal for me is to generate passive income enough that I don't have to rely on a full-time job for work. I want to be able to work for my passion and be able to work for the reasons that I want to work. And I don't think I'll ever retire that early, to be honest. I see myself working to a very, very, very old age, because I'm very curious. I love trying new things. And for me, like, I've been very lucky enough to meet, a very good mortgage broker from my family, but also some friends who are mortgage brokers. So for me, I want to try and get into mortgage broking, and I'm looking to start up a mortgage broking business within the next couple of months. So I want to try and help people do the same thing as well. But in terms of initial goal, I'd like to aim for a 100K passive income. But I haven't really put a number to it. As long as I can continue building my portfolio and adding properties to it that are growing every year and increasing in cash flow, then I'll continue doing so.
Yeah, that's really cool. It sounds like it's more of a lifestyle play, really. It's your passion. It's what you enjoy. You want to, have a shift of career or dabble in mortgage broking, and then also enjoy that passive income on the side as well. So that's really cool, mate. I love it. What do you reckon your most successful deal has been? Which property do you reckon has done the best?
I would say, because I've only been investing for about 7 years now, it's I haven't gone through a full property cycle. I would say the best one, even though I thought wasn't a very good purchase at the time, like the North Sydney apartment that I bought, has grown significantly in value. Maybe because the Sydney market just grew exponentially at that time, and that's kind of what brought it up. But that's what's essentially allowed me to get into my subsequent properties, because of the equity increase and also the rental increase as well with cash flow. Because what I realized pretty quickly is there are two things that are never really in equilibrium. It's your equity and your cash flow. When you're looking at buying property, it's either you have one more than the other. And when I ran out of equity, I had good cash flow, but I didn't have enough money to go and get into it for my deposit. So I needed to buy capital growth properties, and that's what I focused on in the first three properties. Whereas for my later properties, I was focusing more on cash flow because I hit that barrier in terms of borrowing capacity. So the next step for me was to increase my cash flow from an income perspective. And that's why I did what I did to buy properties in Brisbane again. So I did buy 2 more properties this year, which were more cash flow positive, but lower capital growth. And I did that because I wanted to increase my income from a rental perspective.
Oh, that's cool. So you've got 5 in total then?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome. Talk to us a little bit about the next 2. Did you buy them together at the same time, or did you buy them sporadically? Did you use equity? How did that look?
Yeah, so during coronavirus, I thought there's always opportunities. I think there's always money to be made, as there's transfers of wealth all the time, and I thought it was an opportunistic time to look at properties because there may be distressed sales during that period. And my mortgage broker actually inspired me to look in areas of Logan and Brisbane because they have really high rental yields. And he himself, he has a portfolio of over 35 properties. And I was very inspired. I was like, oh, wow, how did you do that? I really want to try and replicate what you do. And he basically explains to me, like, you need to have equity. You also need to have the borrowing capacity to support it. So I knew that I hit my borrowing capacity limit. So we worked out a lending strategy and also worked out how I can increase my income through property investing. And that's when I started to look at areas in Logan. And then I was watching the market very closely. So I was doing a lot of research online. I couldn't fly to Brisbane at the time because of coronavirus. So I just spent a lot of time doing some research. And, I just kind of handpicked a couple of suburbs I was just eyeing very carefully and just watching, the sold prices, speaking to agents. And I managed to find 2 pretty good deals within a couple of months apart. And they both actually had tenants already. I'm not too sure why the owners sold, but it seemed like they were, needing to sell at the time. So I wasn't sure if it was a truly distressed sale, but it was. I thought it was buying under market value, which I thought was a safe way to get in because you essentially make money on the way in. And I already had tenants in there, which were on long-term leases. So I thought it's a fairly risk-free purchase, and it was positively geared at the time as well, with interest rates being so low. So I thought, it's a really good deal to get into. And that's how I got into my most recent 2 properties in Brisbane.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's phenomenal. And I think, that's such a big part of it. And a lot of investors do get stuck on 1 or 2 properties because of that borrowing capacity and not being able to, keep investing or keep pulling out equity and having the cash flow to support another big mortgage. So, you've done well there, mate, to stick on top of a good mix of cash flow and equity. So how's the portfolio looking now? Are you leveraged like crazy? Have you got a pretty good LVR? I mean, the cash flow sounds pretty good, so you sound pretty comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought I would have this much debt, to be honest. At the moment, I've got a portfolio around 2.6 mil with about 80% LVR. So it's self-sustaining. It pays itself off. I have it running on interest only. And I just look at extending the interest only term every time. And essentially the rental income that comes in more than covers the interest repayments plus property expenses. So I'm fairly comfortable, but I think this is a radical mindset shift for me because, as I mentioned to you before, like when I was growing up, I was always told to pay down debt, never have debt. And, my parents didn't believe in debt because they just constantly pay down their home loan, which was a principal and interest loan. And at the time I asked them, oh, why don't you just pay interest only? And they're like, well, you're not paying down debt. But then I said to them, your house is growing in value though. So when you sell it, it'll pay itself off. So they just didn't get that concept. But after I spoke to many investors, that concept became very apparent. And that is essentially what I'm doing. I'm okay with increasing debt. I think you can't really grow a significant portfolio without massive debt, unless you're on a crazy income. And I'm on a fairly average income. I wouldn't say I'm earning incredible amounts of money, but not too little. So I think the point that I'm trying to get across is that you don't need to be earning, super high income to get into property. Like anyone can get in. And yeah, so I would say most people will look at my debt position like, oh wow, you've actually got so much debt. How do you sleep at night? But yeah, it's a mindset shift, with the investing principles. And yeah, once you do the maths and when you work it out and actually calculate it, it kind of takes the emotion away, and you look at it, from a very objective standpoint. If all of your cash inflows are actually bigger than your cash outflows, then that's what matters at the end of the day.
100%. And I think you're spot on with the mind shift thing there. I think kind of circling back to my original point is like when you realize what leverage and equity and compound growth really does, when you think about the debt, yes, 2.6 sounds like a lot of money right now, but in 30 years time, compared to the value of the properties, it's going to be minuscule in comparison. And so although you're still building out your portfolio and you got a pretty comfortable LVR there, so it's not like you're leveraged out of your eyeballs, but you're in it for that long haul. You've got yourself down packed and you're ready to go. So that's awesome, mate. That's really cool. And what are you looking for next? Are you still wanting to invest? Are you thinking about principal place of residence at all? Is there any sort of thing that you're looking out for next?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. Lots of things to think about, to be honest. In terms of buying principal place of residence, yes, that is definitely something I want to do, but probably not in the short term. I do very much believe in the rent vesting concept as well. So essentially renting in an area that you want to live, and you invest in property outside of that. And that's essentially what I'm doing now, rent vesting. And I think it works pretty well, because that way I'm not tied down to having debt on a principal place of residence where I can't claim any tax on. So rent vesting has actually worked very well for me for the last 7 years. And I think that's what I'll probably do up until I get married, or when I want to buy a new place for myself. And in terms of the next property purchase, I think for me is to find a blend of moderate capital growth and positive cash flow properties. I know they are like two things that everyone wants to try and achieve in property, and it can be difficult, but I do believe there are opportunities out there. It just takes time to look for them. So yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to look for is, trying to find areas that are still within the, suburban metro areas, but not like inner city, that still have decent cash flow and moderate capital growth is what I'm trying to look for. And I'm open to all markets as well. It's like, I'm actually quite interested in looking at areas in Perth and Adelaide as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. Being able to diversify, and then, not even just in areas, but throughout your portfolio and balancing out your portfolio. I used to be pretty strong on the capital growth side before COVID, but I think one thing COVID's really demonstrated is how important cash flow is. Like if you've got, some really strong capital growth properties, but you can't afford to hold on to them and you have to sell them, you're losing out anyway. So to have that balance, and as you say, you've got the cash flow properties to keep you paying themselves off, and then you've got the capital growth properties to pull out some equity and keep using for deposits. So it sounds like you got a good balanced mindset there, mate. And rent vesting is awesome. If it works for you, it works for you, because you're allowed to, live essentially where you want to live. If you wanted to get up and move to another state tomorrow, you're not bogged down by one property on a big mortgage or anything like that. You can live where you want to live. You can rent another place out, but you can still invest in all these other areas and allow yourself to diversify out, rather than have a big chunk of money in a principal place of residence. So I think that's cool.
Yeah, nice, spot on.
Any mistakes along the way? Is there any mistakes that you'd like to share with the listeners to make sure that they don't make them themselves?
Yeah, I would say all learnings. So I guess, what you do have to try and make some mistakes in order to learn and improve. But I guess, having a good team where you can speak to before you even make any purchases is always the best thing to do. But I think the first purchase that I bought, I barely did any research. I bought based on gut instinct. So I could have bought in a stronger growth prospect area for a similar price. So I think buying in North Sydney was more of an impulse decision because I just knew the area and I actually didn't look anywhere else in Sydney. But I've seen areas in Sydney that, cost around the same price where I could have got a house, say, for example, in the Sydney West market, or I could have got a 4-bedroom house for the same amount of money. And that probably more than doubled in that time frame. So I wouldn't necessarily say it was a mistake, but it was a missed opportunity because I only looked in North Sydney. I didn't look anywhere else. I didn't actually look for many other properties within North Sydney either. I kind of just bought the first one that I looked at. And I didn't really look into the drivers of apartment growth. So when I bought my Brighton West End property, that's when I started to understand the difference between the different type of apartment complexes and how stratas are managed. But with this one in North Sydney, because it's such an old block of apartments, the upkeep is actually becoming quite expensive in terms of the strata fees. And I realized that, the entire block is essentially renters and it's not being maintained very well and turnover is high. So I've been through quite a lot of tenants in there, but because of the location being so close to the city and also being close to the train station, the vacancy rates are pretty low there. Like I've always been able to find a tenant very quickly, but I guess because it's a tenant market, it has kind of churned through quite a lot of tenants quite quickly as well. So I would say that's probably a missed opportunity or it can be a learning rather than a mistake. For my first loan, I went through a bank rather than through a mortgage broker. Again, this is not really a mistake, but it's like more of an opportunity for learning because I realized when you go to a bank, they only offer you a product that's from them, right? And that may not necessarily be the best product for you. And they may not necessarily know your long-term goals. They just want to help you to buy that property. Whereas for me, I wanted to look at, growing my portfolio. So we didn't really discuss a lending strategy. But after speaking to a mortgage broker, that's kind of when they opened my doors up about how to structure the portfolio, how to pull equity out. What is even equity? At the time, I had no idea what equity was. Like, I didn't even know what the definition of equity is. I just, kind of knew the concept. Everyone talks about it now, using property for collateral as your next purchase, but it didn't really make sense to actually did it. So I think, using a bank rather than a mortgage broker for my first one wasn't necessarily a mistake. But if I had that knowledge up front, I may have, looked at purchasing a different pathway and also look at different lending. Other learnings or mistakes, I think, using a buyer's agent again is another learning that I've definitely got a lot of value out of. I don't think everyone needs to use a buyer's agent, but I think it's definitely valuable and they definitely add value. Because if you're starting off in the journey, you don't really know the process and it can be very daunting and it can be quite long as well. Like from doing your research through to negotiation, through to getting your loan approved, through to getting the settlement and getting a tenant, like that's can be a few month process. So it can be quite daunting. And also if you're very busy, time poor, it can take a lot of time. So I think having gone through 2 buyer's agents, I've been able to learn the process very well now. So going forward, I don't think I need a buyer's agent anymore, but having used them, I definitely have learned that process and know what to look out for in future purchases.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's some pretty sound advice. I love it, mate. And it sounds like you got the process down packed. You know what to look out for and all those sorts of things. The only reason I'm probably in the same category, and the only reason I'd use one is maybe if I couldn't get over states or something like that, like we're in at the moment, and needed someone with some boots on the ground, it would be handy. But I think that's phenomenal. Are you a book guy, a podcast guy, a YouTube guy? Where do you get your information?
I like to use all formats, to be honest. I love podcasts at the moment. Like since coronavirus, I've been working from home a lot. I do walks every morning, and one of my habits that I built up is going for a walk and listening to a podcast at the same time. And I've been listening to Property Couch. They're one of my favorites. I've been reading a lot of different books as well. And yes, not really YouTube, but mainly podcasts and books. They're the main sources of information I've been getting.
Nice. Favorite property book?
Favorite property book, I would have to say The first one I read was Robert Kiyosaki, so Rich Dad Poor Dad. He's also got another book called Cash Flow Quadrant that's more around investing mindset. That it was what radically changed my mindset. And then there's another book written by Michael Yardney. He owns the Metropole Buyers Agency firm. I did use them for my Brighton West End property. So he's got a really good book on property investing as well.
Nice. Yeah, they're two great reads. Three great reads, actually. I've been through those resources, so I love them, mate. And one thing I forgot to ask you about was the part ownership in the gym. How did that fit into everything? How did that come about? And then has it had an issue on your borrowing capacity or getting your loan documents in order? Like, how does that all work?
Yeah, so I've worked at my current job almost 10 years, and I still work full time. But there was just something that I wanted to explore. Like, I really wanted to gain some entrepreneurial experience, and I guess the entrepreneurial spirit inside of me wanted to explore something different. And I always I'm curious. I like learning new things, and business was something that I really wanted to get into. So one of my colleagues at the time, he was working full time in marketing as well, and he owned a F45 gym. And I went to speak to him to have a coffee, and I asked him, how do you maintain full-time work and still own a business? And yeah, I had a great chat to him, and he was a very good example of what I wanted to do in that period of time. And so I was looking at a gym in Chatswood. So after having a couple of chats with him, we decided to go into partnership. So we now co-own the F45 gym in Chatswood, and it's coming up to about 4 years now. We're looking at relocating within the next year. And yeah, it's been an incredible experience just, managing a business, understanding, cash flow, how important that is, because the first year was very tough in terms of managing cash flow and, growing a team, growing a business, having customer base, retaining a customer base. So that was, extreme, I guess, learning curve for me. And that was that was an investment at the time in getting a business loan done. So that's why for a couple of years I was paused. I had a bit of a pause on property investing because I was focusing on the business.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's really interesting. You're really diving into a number of different things, and I guess I just wanted to see how it would tie into the whole investing journey. It's cool. It's also like kind of like another diversification play, right?
Yeah, that's right. Like I love investing. I don't think you need to limit yourself to property. Like I would say I'm pro property, but I wouldn't steer away from other investments. Like I'm at the moment trying to learn a little bit more about the share market as well. So I totally believe the power of investing. And as long as you can find that asset type that suits your needs and also your risk profile, then I think you can make it work as long as the numbers stack up.
Yeah, 100%, mate. And what final advice would you give to the younger generation to getting started?
I think my advice would be open to everything. Talk to as many people as you can. Talk to mentors. If you don't have a mentor, that's okay. Seek out people who've been successful and done, what you want to do. So if it's property investing, then go speak to a property investor who holds multiple properties and who's been in the game for, decades or, has been longer than you have, and interview them like what you're doing, right? Like speak to them, ask them about how they've done and what their learnings were, because success leaves clues. At the end of the day, people don't get there from full, because of luck. They've actually gotten there because they followed a rigor process, and that's the commonality of success in wealth, because people generally has to do the same thing. You can't really skip that stage. People have to build up an asset base. They have to build their wealth through accumulating assets over time. It doesn't just happen overnight. So speak to as many people as you can. These days, a lot of people are willing to help out, listen to podcasts. Like sometimes it's good to listen to everything, but just, be careful who you listen to. Because some people are inexperienced, but I think ultimately speak to people who've done it before and have been in the game for a while, and you can definitely find out what's the commonalities and what you need to do.
Mate, I think that's phenomenal advice. I think you've given a lot of really good gold nuggets today. So thanks again for that, and thanks for sharing your story, mate. It's been super interesting. It's been I didn't know you had 5 properties, so it was really good to walk through the journey and walk through the process. Really went into some good depths and ways you went around it and the times between the properties and all that sort of stuff. So thank you so much for sharing.
No worries, Jordan. Yeah, it's great to chat to you, and I'm very keen to see your future journey as well.
Thanks, mate. We'll have to get you back on when you got the next one.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. It's great to chat.
No worries, mate. I'll speak to you soon.
All right, thanks. See you, mate.
Once again, I was pretty taken back how Jyh had continued to add to his portfolio, and it's good to hear stories of other property investors who haven't got caught up in their own borrowing capacity. I'm always looking for more guests to come onto the show. If you're under 30 and have one or more investment properties, whether it's good, bad or ugly, I would love to talk to you about it. Even if you're interested into getting into the property sector, let's have a chat. The main focus is to help other soon-to-be young investors with tips and tricks along the journey, learn from the mistakes that we have made, and ignite the fire to set themselves up financially for the rest of their lives. If you're interested in sharing a story, you can go to jordandeong.com/podcast, where there's a podcast inquiry button at the top that will guide you through the next steps. If you want to see what else I'm up to, you can go to YouTube and type in Jordan de Jong, where you'll find the Smashed Avo Property podcast being hosted on YouTube, and plenty of other content that I'm putting out consistently. If you're keen for more content like this, make sure you subscribe, and please leave us a review with any feedback for future podcasts. And until next time, happy house hunting.